had inconsistent results from your pre-emerge herbicide applications? We're going to try and solve those issues today by telling you some little things you can do differently with pre-emerge products to make them work better.
Well, we're expecting that pre-emerge herbicide usage is going to go way up here in 2011, in part because commodity prices are good, in part because we're having Roundup resistant weed problems, and also just because we want better weed control. And a lot of farmers, like even for ourselves in our own farm, we just debated this a few weeks ago, we've spent so much time focusing on fungicides and insecticides and all these other things. I think a lot of us just kind of lost track on the weed side of things. We need to get back to that and get back to 100% weed control.
Well, in the meantime, there are some new options that are pretty exciting for pre-emerge products as well that give us some more flexibility. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about some of the pre-emerge products. How about some of the old ones, Brant, like your Treflans, for example?
Okay, when you talk about Treflan and Sonalan and Prowl are all basically the same. Those are what's called root inhibitors. So when the weeds, like let's say pigeon grass or green or yellow foxtail, when they germinate, they're going to put little shoots down or little roots down, and those roots will absorb that product. With Treflan, Sonalan, and Prowl, they're very, very effective on grass and pretty effective on small-seeded broadleaves. When we deal with Treflan, Sonalan, and Prowl, they're mainly for broadleaf crops. So they're very good on grass, and it's easy to get grass, but it's a little more difficult to get broadleaf weeds. So if you've got a product that is like Harness, for example, for corn. Corn is a grass crop. It's much more difficult. Harness has to be a lot more selective because it's going after grass in a grass crop. That's hard to do.
Well, it is difficult, but let's keep in mind where these products work. And I like how you started that section by saying when we're talking about root inhibitors, they can be a little bit deeper. The exception to that is Prowl. Prowl can't be as deep as a Treflan and Sonalan can be. It's typically shallow.
Well, because Treflan and Sonalan can become gas in the soil and move up a little bit, just like Eradicane can, the old Eradicane, it can become a gas in the soil. But Prowl still can be down a little bit.
And you know, a lot of those products that require maybe 2-pass incorporation or deeper incorporation, some of them have been pushed to the side with the change in farming practices. When we get into strip tillage, when we get into no tillage, then you've got to have some different options as well. Let's talk about those corn products just a little bit. You mentioned Harness.
So Harness and all the products that are similar to it, Outlook, Surpass, there are a number of them. They are shoot inhibitors. So if the grass seed or the broadleaf seed is going to germinate at a 1/2 inch deep, let's say, you've literally got to have that herbicide between a 1/2 inch deep and the soil surface. So you want that product more shallow than what you would want the root inhibitors. So again, shoot inhibitors need to be more shallow than root inhibitors.
Now, that brings up a challenge. If you have a product that you can't work in deep, or maybe you're not going to work in at all, how do you get it down to where those shoots are going to start?
Well, this is one of the things on our own farm, like Harness, for example, that we'll go out there with a field cultivator, which could go a little bit deeper, but we'll run it fast. And I often tell guys, run it 8 miles an hour. And the farmer will say, I can't go 8 miles an hour with my field cultivator. And then I say, you know what? That tells me right there, you're running too deep. The reason why we're talking so much about incorporation here is we love incorporation for these pre-emerge herbicides. Now, you'll talk to a lot of people that'll say, oh, just leave them on top. You can do that, but now you need more rainfall to get them activated, because now you not only need to get rain to get the product in the weed, but you need to have rain to get the product down to where the weed can absorb it. So don't leave your herbicide on top of the soil surface unless you want 5 to 20% less control.
Now hold on there. I don't necessarily agree with that because, okay, let's say you can put more irrigation water on. That's great. That's a nice asset to have.
Sure.
But most of the corn acres don't have that across our country. So what you have to do, and the one asset that you have, is time. You need to get out there a little bit earlier.
Okay, so if you want to leave it on the soil surface, I don't prefer that, but if you want to leave it on the soil surface, to Darren's point, just put it out there earlier. Put it out a month in advance, or at least a couple weeks in advance. Or, for example, if you're in Iowa and you get 35 inches of rain a year, it's whole different than if you're in South Dakota and you get 15. Okay, we've got a lot better chance to get that rainfall in Iowa and get that herbicide working than we do if we're in South Dakota.
Well, here's the trap. All right, I'm going with my planter and I'm moving some soil. So I don't want to put my pre out until after I plant.
Yeah, I don't really worry about that. We've done that for many years and gone out and incorporated right before we planted, and we've really never had any problems. As long as you're working that ground in, the planter is usually going to move soil out and move it right back. It's not like it's going to move it out and it's going to stay out. Now, maybe you're set up that way. Maybe you're doing ridge till or something like that. You're in a little bit different situation. But for the most part, if you've got a flat soil surface, you're going to move the dirt out a little bit with the planter, move it back in. You really shouldn't have any trouble.
Plus, in most Roundup Ready crops, you're coming back with Roundup anyway.
Well,
so
that's
if you have
the
a
thing.
few escapes, you can actually control them, where 10 or 20 years ago, we didn't have those options.
Yeah, if you've got a planned respray program, which is basically what Roundup and Ignite are, depending on which crop you're raising, who cares if you miss 5% of the weeds? It's not that big a deal. As long as you got 80, 90% in the first place, you're doing great. And now your Roundup or your Ignite doesn't have to do a lot post-emerge. So again, with any of these pre's, we do prefer incorporation, but with a lot of them, like Harness, that's a shoot inhibitor, you've got to make sure you're only incorporating very shallow.
Unfortunately, none of those pre-emerge options are going to be fantastic on our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?